The disappearing Louisiana coast is a multi-pronged threat that the people of Louisiana are fighting. This WYES podcast looks into how the scope of coastal loss was recognized, who began sounding alarms, and then started developing a strategy to save the coast and a way of life. The Louisiana coast is changing, slipping away to erosion, subsidence, sea level rise. Decades ago, the threat was recognized and a focus on saving the coast evolved. In this podcast, we'll remember those who sounded the early warnings and began the battle to save our coast. Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh, WYES Community Projects producer. Thanks for joining us as we continue our podcast Early Warnings about the beginnings of the fight to save the disappearing Louisiana coast. In this episode, we'll talk about how Louisiana residents came together to form civic organizations to help restore the coast. Joining me are some of those coastal advocates and organizers. Steve Mathies, a coastal consultant with STANTEC, who's also our co-producer and host of our podcast. He's formerly led both state and coastal agency and also the Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program. Mark Davis, director of the Tulane Center for Environmental Law, who helped establish the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, and you were the executive director of it.
I was for 14 years.
All right.
Not the first, though.
We're going to learn more about that. Then also Steve Cochran, who has worked at the federal, state, and local levels to combat coastal loss. And then also Carlton Dufrechou, who led the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation before moving over to working with the Causeway Commission as what, executive director? What is your official position? Okay, so these four guys, they have known each other for a long time and even worked together, it seems, at these different organizations. And what we're going to talk about now is, you all were leaders in these coastal groups that were dedicated to combating coastal loss. And these were groups of citizens who came together. These are nonprofit groups, non-governmental groups, who recognized a problem, got alarmed by it, and said, we got to do something about it. So that's what I want to find out from you all. What were those days like? Why were people alarmed and so concerned? What did you all learn from it? And what were some of the experiences that you had? Steve, we'll start with you.
Well, and I would just say that, for the whole coastal program, I think it's really driven by public engagement. We as citizens, we have to care about an issue before anything happens. And so I think all of us probably had different paths to coming and becoming passionate about coastal issues. We have some of us that were born and raised here and others that weren't, but came to be passionate about Louisiana. So, for me, let me just talk. For me, I'm a kid who grew up on the North Shore. So, I grew up here in Louisiana and saw the coast as primarily a place that we would go and fish a lot. I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, and which, we weren't that great back then about public engagement, but
yeah,
still,
but you led the way.
But it was
to do that. Change that.
Well, and for all of us to kind of think about how that happened, and for me personally, I was the first director of the Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program, and for me, that was a real life-changing experience in my life because the estuary program. It was a collection of nearly 250 different individuals representing different backgrounds, different interests, and they were all from the area between the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya Basin levee. So it was that little slice of Louisiana, and we were charged with developing a long-term comprehensive management plan for that area. And it was an EPA program. There were 28 national estuary programs around the country. They were designated as the most important estuaries in the United States. Ours was different because our main issue was land loss. We had other issues, water quality issues and others, but really the big thing was land loss. And I got to confess that when I started, I came from the Army Corps of Engineers, And they said, you're going to go and you're going to head this program down in Thibodeau. You're going to be at Nicholls State University. And so I arrogantly thought I knew, not only did I know all the questions, but I knew all the answers, okay? and I learned very quickly, of course, that wasn't it. And the way we set up the Estuary program with those individuals, we said, and remember, we have individuals that had been on the opposite sides of court cases, with produced waters or whatever. So you had people from the environmental agencies, and you had people from the oil and gas industry, and you had people from the Sierra Club, and everybody else was part of this. And so we kind of set a rule at the beginning and said, when we're discussing an issue, instead of you sitting there and thinking about what am I going to say next, why don't you think about listening to the guy that's talking to the point that you could then articulate his position. So I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say, but I'm really focused on what you're saying. And so I just kind of fast forward, 5, and we had 4 standing committees, and those committees met once a month for a day-long meeting, and they did that for 5 years. So these people were really committed to this effort. And what we found was that even if you came from different perspectives, once you got to know that person, and guess what, maybe I saw you at a soccer game when my kids were playing soccer, or I saw you somewhere else, and we all began to realize that, we all wanted the same thing. And so when our plan was finished, and this is when our plan was finished, and we were putting the final, dotting the I's and everything, we had a committee meeting, and Harvey Stern, the guy from the Sierra Club, was not there for that meeting. And Vince Catone, the guy who represented Texaco, when we were reading over it, Vince said, well, wait a minute, I gotta say something. Harvey's not here, but if he were here, I think he'd have a concern with this, which caused all of us to say, maybe this is a success, because we've all, joined together and done this. When we finished that plan, everyone had to sign it. So you have a plan that's signed off on by 250 people. Not only the colonel at the Corps and all the secretaries and the governor and everything else, but everyone signed off on it. And that year, that plan was chosen the best plan developed anywhere in the United States from a large jurisdiction, by the American Planning Association. And we were the only estuary program of the 28 that have finished our plan within the original time frame and the original budget. And I would just say, I kind of long for those days where you can kind of sit in a room and talk with somebody about the differences of opinion that you have about an issue and find a way to move forward. And we said everything had to be done by consensus. And consensus wasn't, I love it. Consensus was, I can stomach that because what I am passionate about is in there, okay? So I'm included. So to me, that was really a life-changing
What was the time
thing.
frame of that?
That was the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
And so it was, the same time was happening in Louisiana. We had the formation of the BRO Act was happening all at the same time. We kind of all became this awareness that we all needed to work together. And again, the BRO Act, Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection, and Restoration Act, the beauty of that was that it forced all the federal agencies to sit together at a table and make a decision. You got to realize, before that time frame, everyone would go to a meeting and you would sit there and you would fight for the position of your organization.
Yeah.
It wasn't talking about what do we do as the whole. And so I would say that's probably a lesson we need to, I hope we haven't lost today, that we always sit down and talk about what's good for the whole of Louisiana and how do we get there. And we can have differences of opinion, we can work it out, and we can move forward. But that, for me, that was just a, like I said, a life-changing experience.
And so Steve, the other Steve at the panel too. Now, you were executive director, was it, at the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation? First one?
That's right.
Give us a reference, a time reference of that.
So that was 1990.
Okay, so around the same time.
The Basin Foundation was created in 1989. And the board was made up of some state agency people from the relevant state agencies, but also from, Mr. Powell, an insurance guy, the Glockners, the crab fishermen, really people who lived and knew the lake and cared about it. And it really was that sort of citizen-led. They got convinced the state to provide, in that case, $500,000 to help fund the startup and to begin to move it and like that. And so when I was leaving, I was in state government at the time working for the governor, and when I had worked for him for a while at that point, and it was a good time to get out.
Governor Romer.
Governor Romer, yeah, and he was getting ready to run for re-election and all that, and that's a whole different
that's a whole different story.
whole different game, and I wasn't sure I really wanted to do that anymore, and so the timing was just great for me to be able to. I had, because of the work that we had done, because of what I had learned working at the state level about the relationship that we had with the range of environmental challenges that we had, that I had really been drawn in that direction. And then this opening occurred right about the same time, and it was just perfect for me to be able to come in and actually engage it. But the entity was already created, the foundation was up and running, and they needed somebody to be on a full-time basis to do that. And so I got to do that, and that was really a lot of fun.
You brought someone who was sitting here at this table to come work with you?
So if I remember correctly, indeed.
I have no recollection of this.
Exactly, that's right, which is what I liked about him. He could always give me that quick legal advice. Don't answer that question, Steve. Mark was, I don't know, I'd probably only been there, I'd have to look and see, but just a few months. And Mark showed up, somebody who wanted to be what he turned out to be, but he had voluntary experience he was a lawyer, a tax lawyer, as I recall.
Chicago.
And we were actually just going through our C3 process, and I thought, tax lawyer, perfect. Like, I'll take you. We'll do that. We'll figure out the environmental stuff. But he was ready to go, and it was just great fun.
So when you were in Chicago, did you envision that you would be steeped in Louisiana wetlands?
Oh, I grew up dreaming this, and absolutely not. And nothing in my background prepared me for what I was going to encounter. I mean, again, I was a tax and transactional lawyer. I knew how to do those things, and they needed somebody who could keep them honest from a tax standpoint. But you may remember, BTNEP was the official estuary program here. But there was a Pontchartrain program that was kind of NEP light. Yeah. And so all of that was running really through the foundation. And so all those kinds of things that had been done to set up the estuary program had to be done within the foundation. And so I told him I could do that. I don't know if I really could have, but yeah. And that's when I came down and actually got a call from my predecessor at the coalition, Michael Milkey. Once we were talking about some issue. Oh, I know. I called him saying, "You guys should be doing something that I'm getting calls about. Coalition should be on the lead on this." And Michael said, "We need to hear this. You should be on our board." And that was a call that went very wrong. You call to complain and you get homework. And then I realized, well, maybe that's how it works. And then I went in to see Steve. He said, the coast is disappearing. All this other stuff's going on. And I thought, it can't be true. Because if it had been true, I'd have heard about it. And I hadn't heard about it up in Chicago. And then I thought, well, and if it is true, top people would have been working on this for a very long time. And then I realized it's not true either. Somebody has to make top people work on things. Somebody has to get the resources for them. And that's really kind of the lesson, I think, that I drew from the foundation, because it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for people like Bennett and Robert and Connie turning a problem with the causeway, because there had been some scandal about how money was being used or not used. But that led to the initial funding of the foundation. And then when I went to my very first board meeting as a Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana board member, and there were like 35 people in the room. I'm a corporate lawyer. You don't do this. This is insane. And then you look around, you realize no two people in the room come from really the same background exactly. But the first order of business was, so how are we doing? In 1989, Louisiana and its citizens passed Act 6, which created the coastal program at the state level and devoted some funding to it. Then in 1990, we passed the BRO Act, which did the same thing on the federal level and put the partners together. And the first order of business was, well, has this coalition done what it set out to do? Now, I've never, ever been part of an organization that asked that question because they were succeeding. We're tired, we're broke, I get that. And Bob Jones, who was the parish engineer for Terrebonne Parish, raised his hand and he said, I don't know about the rest of you, but Terrebonne Parish did not get into this to pass laws. We got into this to save this coast, and I don't think we've done that yet. That moment changed the way I see things and see people. And then, oddly, within 4 months or 5 months after that, I got the chance to become executive director, a job I thought I knew but had actually completely was unprepared for. But I had wonderful mentors, because it turns out that 30-some-odd member board of directors, which included people from national environmental groups, fishers, local business people, government people, faith-based people, they actually believed in what they were doing, and they were the best focus group you could ever have. Right. I never, if I had to testify in front of a congressional committee or something like, I never went in not knowing what I could say, because I'd already heard every possible question, and I knew what the answers needed to be.
Moving on over to Carlton right now. I'm jumping in.
I would just jump in and just say, it's really great that you mentioned, Bob, because as you're having these discussions, really bring up the names of those people, the individuals that were so important in these organizations, because I don't want these people to be forgotten, or the contributions that they made, and you're the only people that know this, okay? So I just
I'm going to give you one more. Then I'm going to give you one more. Don Davis.
Yeah.
You know Don? Don from California, but he's gone as native as you can go, and he's still out there working, writing,
and he's on one of our podcasts.
Well,
one of our episodes.
But I'd been executive director for a couple of months, and he came in to see me, and he said, I think I know a bit about you. You're well raised, your family did a good job, and you're from Indiana, and this, that, and the other. And I'm thinking, well, yes, I was well raised. And he said, but I want to tell you something, because now you're in a position, kind of authority. People are going to expect you to be something of a leader. And so you're going to be asked to do things and this, that, and the other. And I was thinking, I don't need to be told I'm a pro. And he said, well, because you're going to be asked, to come over for dinner after a meeting, to come over for a cup of coffee, come down for the blessing of the fleet, come this, that, and the other. And he said, I know, because you're well raised and you're from Indiana, that you'll say, well, that's a lovely invitation. Thank you very much. Another time, perhaps. And he says, because he knows where I'm from, those are greetings. They're not really invitations. And he said, your job is to say yes every time, because they want to hear something from you, or there's something they want to tell you in their way. And your job, it doesn't matter how hungry you are, how thirsty you are, how seasick you get on a boat, your job is to say yes and listen. And that was absolutely the best advice I ever got.
And I'm sure you heard a lot, I'm sure.
Oh, I've heard a lot. Some of it wasn't as good.
Carlton, okay, we're going to jump over to you, because you came along also with the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation. You found yourself there, but you had been with the Corps, as he had worked with the Corps as well.
Right.
So when you came into the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, what was the experience like for you? And were you learning stuff like Mark learned about what the people needed and wanted and what they were thinking about?
Well, Steve and Mark did the heavy lifting, and sincerely, they got the organization going. In this Steve Mathies over here, I was not a hardcore engineer, but a practicing engineer, and actually it's before the Corps was in private enterprise. I always enjoyed the outdoors. I hunted and fished with my dad. I learned to swim in a lake, loved it. But I never thought of myself as an environmentalist until actually probably maybe the last 2 years in the Corps of Engineers. I started recognizing things going down the drains. But I would suggest that all of us, forgive my emotions on this, but I sincerely believe this was beyond any of our guidance. Forgive me for grabbing from John Belushi. I think we were on a mission from God. I'm sincere about this, that each of us had a place at a specific time. And when I went in with the LPBF, again, I was a renegade at the Corps. I loved the water. I heard that they were looking for a new ED. I didn't think they wanted an engineer. And frankly, I don't think they did when I first went in. But one of the first interview I had with a couple of the board members was in a conference room. You may remember, Steve, a small one in Lakeway. And I thought I was prepared for it. And the folks asked me, why do you want to do this? And I thought for a second and then just looked out the window, and it's this doggone 630 square miles of gorgeous lake. And it wasn't me speaking, but I suddenly was this eloquent guy that I never was as a stoic engineer, and talked about, and it was sincere that, I grew up loving this place, and the things that our generation, our parents had enjoyed so much, we were losing. Initially on my end with LPBF was Mark is exactly correct. We were what kind of BTNEP light and Chesapeake Bay light from the LPBF, and we went through much of the same exercises with the comprehensive management plan. And the thing I learned it in the Corps, but the problem with the Corps of Engineers has come a long way, as we all know, and thank gosh it has. But when Steve and I first were in the Corps, the deal with the Corps was we're both in the planning sections, and you would be given a problem, a challenge, something to go fix, and you'd be given all this data. And the model was, you got all this data, all these people around, you come up with a plan, and then we're going to go public with it, which was crazy. Forgive me, backwards completely. And he and I, again, I think we're one of the first guys that started talking to the clients, finding out what they wanted. But that's what exactly happened certainly with the CRCL, with BTNEP, with LPBF in the initial days. You guys mentioned Cliff and Connie Glockner, they were on the board. And Steve had, between these two guys, had set up the board. That LPBF's board originally was, Steve mentioned, the 4 state agencies, and then it was membership-based. The members would actually elect the board members. And these folks, they took it seriously. Cliff and Connie, I learned more from, Cliff was oh my gosh, I was 30-something then. Cliff was probably, what do you think, 40-something?
Between 40 and 100.
40 and 100. He looked like he's weathered. This dude, he and Connie would fish with him too, but he's a true waterman. And as much as I thought I knew about not necessarily the lake, but the coast from hunting and fishing down there and land loss, this guy, he nailed it right away, that the primary problem with the Pontchartrain Basin is an MRGO and saltwater intrusion coming in, and there's tidal surges. And lo and behold, it took, that was 1992, I guess, and it wasn't until 2009 that the doggone thing was closed. But when it was closed, within a matter of a year, the salinity started reverting above it, all of the stuff about the cypress trees that Mark was pressing so hard for, and Coalition to replant in Maurepas, they finally had a chance to regenerate. But the locals, I guess the common denominator for me would be the people that are in the field, no matter how much we may think we have a bit of an education or background, but the people that are in the field that live it, they know it. And again, forgive my emotions, but I truly believe that each of us, for me, it was a gift. It was the best thing that ever happened to me.
You mentioned Cliff.
Yeah.
You know, because somehow or other, you know, the foundation was invited to go give some testimony in front of some congressional committee, and you know, we decided that, you know, Cliff would be a good person, but he'd never done it. I'd never done it. You had probably, but you didn't tell me how to do it. So Cliff and I trundled ourselves up to Washington, D.C., and thank goodness we knew people up there who could tell us what testimony looked like. You know, that's where you've got to really build your network. But of all the people who testified that day, Cliff is the only one that staff came up afterward and said, I'd like to talk to you more. You know, and it's like, you know, they didn't want to hear from, you know, really from me. They didn't want to hear from people who were being paid to be there at that point. They really were hungry for somebody who actually could.
It lived it.
Well, and actually, you know, made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, I mean, what Cliff, and I think everybody knew, I mean, you know, MRGO would be open today if all that work to close it hadn't been done, you know, in the intervening time.
Yeah.
Because the default decision was to reopen it.
Yeah.
So you just sometimes have to wait until the moment, and then, but if you haven't done your homework, it's sort of like, you know.
I just remember when I wanted to go with, you know, when I was first taking the job down here. I mean, I grew up across the lake, and I'd done my share of recreating, as they say, around the lake, right? So I understood that part of it, but I'd never worked a day in my life on around the lake either. So I got Cliff to take me out crabbing for a day. Mm-hmm. Really dumb idea on my part.
Yeah, you worked.
but it was really, I got a dose of Cliff in that as well. For example, you know, every year there'd be a complaint about the river water coming into the lake, and it was ruining everything like that, and it definitely cause its problems. Cliff was the first guy I knew who was honest about that. He said, "Yeah, it's gonna be bad this year. It's gonna be great next year."
That's exactly right.
So we get another really good year every time this happens to us. And I was like, no one's ever told me that before. And he said, "Well, you know, we kind of like to argue about the problem. We don't really like coming in here, but we'll do fine next year." I mean, it was just that guy. He just understood that stuff at that sort of fundamental level. It's funny.
Yeah, Cliff and Milton Calm were the two people on the board who who not only knew a lot but would put up with me.
Yeah, well, all of us.
And who realized that, you know, I needed schooling.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll just say, because you said it's something outside of yourself that calls you to be to this. Do you remember when Bill Good at DNR, there was a meeting once, and that, you know, he kind of turned to everyone and he said, you got to realize if you work in coastal, it's not a job, it's a calling.
Yeah, it's a
And
passion.
I'll always remember that, because everyone kind of rallied around that yeah, this is really special. You know, we're working to save our homes and the state. And that was a feeling, I think that feeling still exists today in the coastal, you know, arena. And you look at what was built over time. If you go from where we were back then to a coastal program in Louisiana that really is recognized as the best in the world. And it's something that we lead all those categories in coastal resiliency and everything else. And I think sometimes we kind of forget that, you know, what's been built and how slow. It takes a long time to build, and it takes a lot of people playing little bits and pieces along the way. But it's still a really special thing.
But it's a relay race. Somebody has to take the baton at each stage, which is right now where we are, I think. I mean, we have a lot of problems with the coast right now and coastal program, some of which are evidence of progress. I mean, some problems you only get to after you've solved a bunch of other ones. And so you have to start recognizing that the 10th hurdle in a race, you know, you're lucky to get to that hurdle.
Yeah, exactly.
You still have to clear it, though. And I mean, I think right now, you know, what we're seeing with the coastal program is that it is not as transparent as it used to be.
No, unfortunately.
I know that, you know, most of the people I work with at, you know, with civic groups don't have the relationship with state government, local government, and certainly the Corps that I was able to have. At one point, the Corps, I don't know if I was so effective or so, you know, so innocuous that they offered me an office over there, you know, when I was with the coalition, but they thought we were that kind of partner. And they also had...
At least that way they'd know when you were there.
Yeah, exactly. And they had Sue Hawes, who was, you know, actually a Sierra Clubber, but also she was the project manager for the environment, the only one in the Corps of Engineers and the only one they've ever had And it was a remarkably smart thing for, I think it was Colonel Diffley to have done, or maybe Colonel Connor.
Before Diffley.
But
Gorski, maybe.
I think it was actually Diffley.
It was?
It was after Gorski.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in any event, you could go in and work with them. The security was different in those days, but the point is that it was they had to engage.
Yeah.
And even when they were making mistakes, as you remember when the first, QIPRA plan, quite frankly, it didn't turn out well. And the colonel actually had to hand out grades, and they weren't positive. And he had to take, and feelings got bruised, but they were bruised in pursuit of something important.
They're positive.
And the only reason is and you know this better than almost anybody, Steve, when we went from from QIPRA to Coast 2050 and then the Louisiana Coastal Area Authorization, which is the blueprint foundation for what's the master planning process today, that would have gone nowhere without, the state, civic support pushing it, because the state was never going to do it by itself, and the Corps was never going to do it, but they were willing to be pushed. And that time when we found $1 million to turn Coast 2050 into a recon report, which allowed everything else to happen after that, which completely turned the Corps of Engineers and authorization process on its head, but it worked. But that was because of people of the Corps of Engineers, you and Bob Buson in particular, who not only were open to it, but they knew things that nobody else could possibly know. I loved those moments.
So what I'm hearing from you guys then, I mean, these let's talk about the nonprofit groups that were formed. I keep hearing about the people. They're making their voice known, what their desires are. I mean, it seems to me like these were really important groups that were formed, that they were more than just groups of people coming together saying, we share this concern. But these groups have actually helped and continue to help propel this restoration movement. Is that
That's my
the case?
experience.
They were the catalyst.
No, I think it's
They were
right.
the catalyst.
I mean, the LPBF has turned into it's now the Conservancy, the Pontchartrain Conservancy, but it is very active. There's a big discussion going on around Lake Maurepas right now about whether to run piping through there and destroy some of those wetlands out there. And they're very much involved in really trying to make sure that those conversations turn out positively, not just happen. Really engaged, and it's very strongly science-based and very focused. And I think they were doing really a great job today. We had 4 or 5 people in a really nice office. I can't remember who gave us free space up in the lake, one of the liquid towers. It was absolutely gorgeous up there. But there were like 4 or 5 of us, I guess, at the time. And so now it's really turned into quite a thing because of the foundation that you were able to build forward. And so it's been.
I think that was at a time whenever, we kind of went from this. Everything is fine in the coast and we all just fish and enjoy it, to this recognition that, oh my gosh, we have the land loss problem on our hands. And so all that was happening at the same time, and I think it was easy to motivate people because the issue was new, it was real, you could see it, you could feel it. And I just kind of wonder if today, I'm just throwing this out, if it's as easy today to continue to motivate people to be so actively involved in these efforts. And I don't know, and maybe I'm just not actively involved now as I used to be, but there was such an urgency that you could feel that passion when you attended those meetings. I mean, people were outspoken, they were all there, and I don't know if that.
I think it's still there, but different. I mean, I wasn't here when the coalition was formed, and I wouldn't have, quite frankly, been smart enough to do it the way they did it. But, again, it was born out of desperation, but also the connection between scientists, technically proficient people, and essentially stakeholders who had a real fundamental interest. Not all, and they didn't identify themselves as conservationists, environmentalists, whatever. They're just, something needs to happen. And one of the catalysts, at least it was told to me, was when the oil patch collapsed in the 80s. and all sorts of people tried to go back to, the coast that had supported them one way or another,
Fishing.
and it wasn't there. And the land wasn't there. And so you started seeing the tax base eroding. You started seeing, if you were in social services, you started seeing more alcoholism and domestic abuse. And you start realizing, oh, that's because, quite frankly, these are families under stress. I never would have made those connections. But Rob Gorman did. Sarah Scheffler did. People like that did. And they started trying to figure out what was going wrong with their world and what could be done about it. I mean, they didn't start to create a movement, but they formed one. And I think when you start looking at, are we going to remain insurable? Are we going to remain investable? Are we going to have any aspect of the culture and economy that we've had? I mean, it's one thing to decide you don't want to do a project like Mid-Barataria. It's quite another to decide what you do want to do.
Yeah.
It's easier to get people to decide what they don't want than what they're willing to do. And that's why the consensus process that Steve was just talking about is so key.
Yeah.
That perfection doesn't exist, but doing nothing is also a decision, and you have to take ownership of that. And that, I think, is kind of where we are right now, where it's and I do see a lot of energy out there building. I mean, I deal with a lot of younger people since I teach at Tulane. The degree of interest and passion that I see just in my students, and some, including undergrads, is really invigorating. But giving them a place to engage in a way, to get involved, that takes work. But we'll see.
So the citizen engagement, maybe it's a bit different than in these formative years, but it's still really necessary, is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. And again, we didn't need Women in the Storm in 1989. You definitely needed it after Katrina. You didn't need Ruthie Fryerson's, Citizens for One War. Essentially, you build, the civic institutions you need if you want to get where you need to go. If you're waiting for someone else to make a decision, and Steve made a great point earlier that if you're expecting other people to care more about your future and your community than you do, you're waiting for something that's not likely to happen.
I think a challenge in this model, which is a reactive model, is that when something bad happens here, it's really bad, right? We reacted to Katrina. The cost of that is still unimaginable. But that's what we reacted to. And I think that the momentum that came from that allowed so much great work to have been done just in the last few years has slipped some. People's memories fade.
I agree with you.
They go to the next thing. And so the challenge, I think, for those of us who believe in people-centered progress, right, coming from the ground like that, is how do we engage when the crisis isn't right upon us? I mean, we've learned to live with the fact that we're losing some coastline, and we've believed now for the last few years that we had some real promise in terms of how much progress we were making, and we've hit a bump in the road here with this one, and so there wasn't a lot of organized response to that in a way that you would hope could occur as a way to help balance these issues. So I do think that I do worry that momentum that we built on a crisis has faded some, and we have to think about how to do that better.
Yeah, and kind of keep that energy going with it.
Or recreate it, because I'm not sure the energy is really as much as we need it to be. Right.
You're right.
It was great. It's great you two brought up Katrina again, because I tell the story of having lived through Hurricane Betsy. We always refer to that as a storm of a lifetime.
Yeah.
It was the same way. We didn't really think that we were going to have another one of those in our lifetime. So if that's in the back of your mind, then you can keep planning and planning and planning and just moving down the road. Okay? Katrina changed that for us when it happened again, and now we look at the forecast of the future.
Right.
We all should realize that Katrina wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You look at what happened, you had Katrina, Rita, Gustav Ike, the whole litany between then and now, 20 years. And that's going to be the model probably more frequently and maybe higher storms go in the future. So if we want to continue to live here, what do we do differently?
We're going to get whacked in a bad way every 15 to 20 years.
That's right. And as we get older, as an older guy,
Worse and worse.
maybe I could have withstood Katrina the way we did 20 years ago. That's one thing when you're 50 and you redo it. When you're 70, you don't want to have to do that again. It's
definitely a different
or
feeling,
anything
yeah.
else. You have a whole different mindset. And if you're young, you need to be saying, if I'm going to invest here, it needs to be long term. I need to feel confident that we're going to be here. Okay.
Following up on what Steve meant, that we lost some of the momentum, the interest. The best thing, and none of us want to relive Katrina, the best thing about Katrina to me was the folks who came back. That was truly the best of the best. You really had to want to be here.
Right.
It was nothing fun about, we all know it, we lived it. And I don't mean this to sound negative to anyone who went someplace else. Steve's exactly right. I was 20 years younger then. I'd be very pressed to have the energy to do that kind of rebuild again. But the folks that came back then, they were focused that we wanted to save this place. And everyone knew, I agree with you too, Steve, that the recognition of the demise of our coast had been becoming more and more increased from your work, from everybody's work, from the MRGO. That was literally wiped the slate clean in the Gulf Coast, and almost did it to us. And certainly all the stuff after the storm with the federal folks in particular, you can't say enough about Senator Landrieu and the work that she did for so long, all the congressional delegation for that matter. But the concern I've got is that I think we have lost that. Folks are still passionate, Mark. I think you're right there. But the folks that have lived it, forgive me, we're still there, we still want it, but I don't see the flame in some of the new folks coming up that I did years ago. I would hate to think that we'd have to have another event like that.
No, we
to bring
certainly
it
don't
back.
want another event like that. So basically, the organizations that you guys helped develop and shepherd and grow, and had that fire with people who just really, really had that fire and passion, these organizations still need the community to
Yes,
be involved
so
in
much
them.
so.
Because I know
And they're-
you have volunteer, and all of these organizations have volunteer efforts. They need the volunteers. Planting Trees Coalition does that all the time. Pontchartrain Conservancy, has a need for volunteers. So, because I'm getting to the point of we're going to have to wrap this up soon. So I really would like for you all to directly now send, what would be the message that you would send to anybody who's watching this or listening to this? What's the need now? The passion was there 30 years or so ago when these organizations were coming up. What do we need now to keep that passion and interest going? What would be your appeal to the public out there? Carlton, let's start with you.
John Hankel, who I think some of us will remember from a state senator from many a moon ago, just before Katrina, thank gosh, he passed just before the storm. I'm glad he didn't live it. But just before the storm, I ran into him at College Inn, of all places, the old College Inn, and Senator Hankel was up there where you usually find him, having Colden Court at the bar. And he was kind of happy at the point, but he just before he left, he came back. I was sitting down with my wife eating, and came over and said, Carlton, if we don't save the coast, nothing else in this damn state matters.
Wow.
Oh, God, did that? Yeah, I remembered it. It hit me then, but this was April, 4 months later, we get Katrina. Did it hit me at that point? And subsequently live with it for the next 20 years and probably always will. Everybody talked about consensus and listening to people. What I think we've lost in some ways, Marcia, is, I think to some degree it's the result of this, that we get so much information dumped on us all the time that we're not really sure what's the truth and what's not the truth. The coast is sinking out of sight every day. I would like to think most of the folks know that, but the reality of it is, for most of us, it's out of sight and out of mind. So we're not We're not recognizing it until, as Steve said, a storm comes up. Then we suddenly think about, oh my gosh, we don't have that 2,000 square miles that we had a decade, eons ago. If I had my wish, it would be that everybody had an opportunity to meet some folks like the Cliff and Connie Glockners, like the Milton Combs, the folks that have lived it, that have really seen the changes, and could you sit around a table like this and tell some of the stories so some of the younger folks coming up would, I agree, there's the passion there, but it's, you got to get it in your blood. If you got it in your blood, you'll keep it going forever and ever.
Steve?
Well, there are, let's say on coastal specifically, there's Restore the Mississippi River Delta, which is an organization that has multiple member organizations a part of it. What I try to do when I have an issue that I'm confused about or want to understand better is I try to find a source who's actually doing it, who's actually doing it, that I can see as credible. And so then I reach out to them and try to understand. So, I call people at Second Harvest when I want to know what's going on with the food problems in this. because I know they know what they're doing. I don't, right? But they're credible. They do good work. That's for every single person who has. I read this in the paper, or I saw this. I don't know what it means. Take that time to reach out to that organization and find out, because they know. They will know. Call Restore. They'll know. Call CRCL. They'll know, right? So the organization, I don't know that there needs to be a new organization as much as take advantage of the Pontchartrain Conservancy and CRCL and Restore that are here, that are actively engaged in it. It makes them feel really good and excited because people actually see value in what they're doing, right? But I don't know that it's more complex than that. But you do have to take that step.
Good point. And BTNEP, of course, too. Mark?
And BTNEP, absolutely.
Well, again, I'm lucky to be around passionate young people, and which was something I wasn't all that passionate about when I was their age. But you have to create opportunities for those people to get engaged.
Yeah.
And New Orleans is not the easiest place civically, to break into if you're not from here. So yes, I do think we have to find ways of introducing people to the existing organizations. But my advice is, if you can't find one that works for you, create one. We created, what's now Healthy Gulf, because it needed to be there. The Gulf Restoration Network, it didn't exist initially. And also keep in mind that it's not the same community it was after Katrina.
Right.
At one point, New Orleans was the undisputed economic center of the South. It's about 100 years ago. It's not anymore. But when Katrina hit, you still had major banks headquartered here. You had insurance companies headquartered. You could engage a King Milling in his capacity as a bank president, and it meant something very different than it might today, because those organizations aren't here. So you have to always reinvent, if you will, the kind of the roadmap of the community, and to figure out who listens to whom. And who is doing it, who is speaking to the extent of their job description, and who is speaking to the extent of their knowledge and passion. Different things.
Yes.
But you have to also get involved politically. If you're not voting, you're invisible. And it's not just partisan politics. For example, I had never in my life testified in front of governmental bodies until I moved down here. And there for a while, when I was with the coalition, I was in Washington once every, 1.5 months. And you have to make yourself available to the people you want to influence. No one has ever run for governor pledging to save the coast. Every governor who's done a good job was basically educated by people they feel obliged and trusting to listen to. And that's how. And has that happened with Governor Landry yet? Jury's out. But someone needs to. I may not be that person, but I'll promise you there is someone that, every decision maker, and they may not even be here. If you want your insurance to stay in place here, you better start talking to people in places that run insurance companies, because I'll promise you they don't understand what's happening here. Because we did that with State Farm once. We actually got them to send a team down to Louisiana because they knew every time there was a storm everywhere in the United States, they got more claims than they had before.
Still,
And they didn't know how to underwrite that. And they assumed that was the case in Louisiana. It's not. We don't have people moving to the edge of the Gulf. The Gulf is moving toward the people.
Right, that's great.
And they didn't understand that if the only way for them to manage that risk is to be part of something bigger than themselves. But I do think if you're, if you're not engaged in the governance game, then you're going to be a victim of governance as opposed to a manager of governance.
So involvement is the key.
yes.
Always has been.
Always has been.
Yeah, and
Wrap it up.
I'll just wrap up, kind of pick up on one of the things you said. For all the people that are listening and you're younger and you're trying to figure it out, we have all been blessed in that we've been able to live our life and work on things that were bigger than us.
That's why I became a tax lawyer.
That we were passionate about. I would just say, so if someone's looking at wanting to be part of something that's bigger than them,
Definitely.
the idea of getting involved with saving the coast of Louisiana, the homes for all these people, our culture, our everything else, I don't know if there's a bigger thing to get involved with. And if you do get involved with it, it's really rewarding, and it touches your life.
Go for what you love. It's
Yeah.
so much more rewarding than
And remember what John Hinkle said. What did he tell you again? One more time?
we don't save our coast, nothing else in this state. Doggone state will matter.
Yeah.
Gives you something
Yeah,
to
see,
think about.
strong language.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Okay, guys, thank you so much. This has been just
Thank you.
a great, great conversation. I've enjoyed so much just sort of leaning back and listening to you all talk about the people and the things that you did. And now you've got you all helped establish these really meaningful citizen organizations that are helping form policy and can do it even more so. So thanks to all of you all.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks.
thanks a lot. And thank you all for watching too, and be sure to join us for our other episodes of Early Warnings to learn more about the people and the planning and the projects that started the effort to protect and restore the Louisiana coast. Thanks for watching. You can find all episodes of Early Warnings on WYES YouTube and other sites where you get your podcasts. Go to WYES.org for more information.
All of the views and opinions expressed by the participants in this program are solely their current opinion and do not reflect those of WYES or its affiliated associations.